Hello, I'm Dr. Cheryl, and welcome to Wake Up with Dr. Cheryl, Wealth Transformation. Our show is raising the consciousness in the relationship with wealth and unconditional love. Always remember that your present situation is not your final destination. The best is yet to come, by Zig Ziglar. I'd like to start with a funny joke. A 54-year-old woman had a heart attack and was taken to the hospital. While on the operating table, she had a near-death experience. Seeing God, she asked, "Is my time up?" God said, "No, you have 43 years, 2 months, and 8 days to live." Upon recovery, the woman decided to stay in the hospital and to have a facelift, liposuction, breast implants, and a tummy tuck. She even had someone come in and change her hair color and brighten her teeth. Crossing the street on her way home, she was killed by an ambulance. Arriving in front of God, she demanded, "I thought you said I had 43 years. Why didn't you pull me out from the path of the ambulance?" God replied, "I didn't recognize you." Our show this evening is about the wealth of death with Jill Lessard for a second round. We are talking about death, which might or could be uncomfortable for some of you. However, it is a part of life, and we want to possibly open up this subject so you can feel good or better about it. Death can be sad and hurtful, and it can be freeing. So please try and be open-minded about this subject. Jill Lessard, our guest, graduating from Northwestern University with a BS in radio, TV, film production. Jill embarked on a career in network television PR. She won a Publicists Guild of America Award for managing ABC's national media campaign for the groundbreaking sitcom Ellen. She was senior writer-editor for ABC.com and Oscar.com, the official website of the Academy Awards. She also hosted the first ever live webcast on the Emmy Awards. Since moving to the Bay Area, she has co-produced numerous video segments for Marin TV, 2 of which won Hometown Media Awards for the Alliance of Community Media. Jill has a master's in spiritual psychology from the University of Santa Monica. Well, Jill's here for the second time around, and welcome, Jill. And actually, this is kind of interesting, but you had mentioned that our conversation should be around death, and I'm actually enthralled to talk about it because it's an important subject, and thank you for bringing it up.
I am so glad that you were open to doing a show where we discuss death, because I think in our culture it's long overdue that we begin to talk about death and not have it be such a forbidden subject, or, you know, I mean, I just mentioned it to a colleague and I could tell, you know, it was like, "Oh, are you talking about," you know. Yeah, that's the kind of reaction you get. It's like, there's something wrong with you for wanting to talk about it, or I just don't get it.
Well, you know, I know when we started to talk about it, when you brought this up to me, and I know I have had several confrontations with death myself, and I think that there's fear around it because people don't know what to expect when they die. But when you have, well, for one, I was almost dying when I was born because I was an RH baby. It's when your father's positive and your mother's negative. And the year that I was born, they came up with an anti-serum. So now this never would happen again. At least not in a progressive country. It's when your blood goes bad on the third child. So basically when they cut the cord, the umbilical cord, my blood was going bad. I was dying. And, you know, in fact, it makes me even get goosebumps when I talk about it, because I have always wondered why I was claustrophobic. And now I understand why I have such a drive to get things done and do things, and my energy level now, because I had to fight for my life to begin with. Of course, I wasn't conscious as a baby, an infant. You know, I wasn't conscious of it, but this has like been with me my whole life, and I know I've met one other person that experienced this, and I haven't talked to her for many years. But you know what? It's if we could let go of that fear. I think it would really open up people to live, because we're dying. No matter what, we're dying. If you're not living, you're dying. So meaning living, having, you know, enjoying life in every moment that you possibly can. Otherwise, you're dying. You know, even the thoughts you think, the negative thoughts that go through your head, you're dying, and because that negative energy is going into your body. So letting go of the fear. Now, how do you do that?
Well, you know, it's interesting that you should bring up fear, because it's fear of the unknown, and yet we don't know anything about what happened to us before we were born, before we were consummated, as it were.
Are you saying like before the conception, or during the pregnancy?
No, before the conception.
Oh, okay.
So where did we come from? Why aren't we fearful of that? Or, you know, the same way that we're fearful of where we're going. In other words, you know, there should be no fear. It's all part of the life, death, you know, cycle.
Right.
It's, but there is, be that as it may, there is a real, I think, fear, a discomfort.
Yes.
It's not something that people want to talk about, and I think it's really important that we do talk about it.
Yeah, and I think religion has something to do with this. You know, the impact of how people feel about it. You know, I have actually been with one person in particular that made her transition while I was holding her hand, and I will never forget that experience. She had liver cancer, and one evening I knew something was up because she didn't take her earrings out or her teeth out, and she always took those out. And she was 84 at the time, and she had her deceased husband's urn next to her bed with his ashes. And that night she goes, "Well, good night, sweet prince." And she'd never done that before. Now, I knew that she never wanted to leave. She never wanted to go into a convalescent hospital because she didn't want to do that to her kids. Well, anyway, that night, it was about 1 o'clock in the morning. I heard her breathing really deep, and it was almost like a death rattle. And there's nothing like it. It's so distinctive, you know what it is. So I got up, and she was still breathing, and she still seemed okay. So about 2 hours later, I heard the same noise. So it was 3 o'clock in the morning. I go to her bed, and her eyes are like slit there, but she didn't look like her spirit wasn't there. It was a really strange experience. And it scared me at first, but I took her hand, and I called my mother, because my mother was a caregiver. My mom said, "Call hospice." So I called hospice, and what angels they are, those nurses. So the very first thing she said, "Put up the handles on the bed." So, because if she does come, well, I noticed that she had a whole vial of morphine, and it was gone. So she planned this. She took the morphine because she didn't want to be a burden on her family. She took the morphine. So, and I noticed that, but I told the nurse, because I had never dealt with this before. So then I was holding her hand. It didn't scare me to hold her hand because I wanted to help her get across to the other side physically, and also spiritually. So the nurse said, "Put up the arms on the bed, because if she does come back, she's going to be one mad person because it didn't work." So I just prayed. I just held her hand and I prayed. and prayed and just said, God, please take her. You know, she doesn't want to be here. She's sick, you know. So it took maybe, I don't even remember the time frame, but I think it was like 10 minutes or maybe 5 minutes. And then all of a sudden, it's like she was gone. Her body, you know, it's just, then it's just a corpse, you know. But I knew her spirit was outside of her body. I could just tell by the way her face looked. I can't explain how I know that, but I just knew that. Anyway, I felt so good about being there for her because she wasn't alone. She wasn't alone. I don't think we're supposed to be alone. I mean, some people choose to be alone, but you know, so from that point forward, I thought I have nothing to fear around death because death is natural. You know, I mean, yes, it's sad when it's like from an accident or something violent. You know, I'm not sure about that, meaning, you know, are they paying karma or what? I don't understand all that. I'm not sure. Part of me says that there's karma involved with, you know, if you treat people good, you're gonna go in a good I mean, my father passed away in his sleep, and he was a wonderful man. So, and then I had an aunt who wasn't very nice, and she suffered terribly at the end. Pain. She got all kinds of cancers, and she suffered. So, you know, I'm just not sure. But being fearful of death, you know, it's almost like birth. It's just the other side of it. So you're you know, truthfully, when the time comes for me, which probably won't be for a long time, then you're free of this mortal coil.
Well, that's, I think, what I'm trying to sort of describe would be that nothingness, or that the unknown on that end is the same as the unknown prior to.
Absolutely.
So we're just going to, you know, we're just going back to that that space, or that, you know, we don't know what it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's definitely there. I mean, we were there before, and I believe we will go there again when we were at the end of our life.
Yeah, yeah, and also I think it's a metaphor too. Death, you know, it's like, you know, I started thinking about this after we decided to do this. Is that I think it's important to also put it in perspective when you've gone through some really tough times with people and hurtful things happen. It's like we need to have a death in our minds, in our heart sometimes, to let go of painful things. It's like you've got to let go so you can rebirth. You know, I think that that's a huge thing psychologically and spiritually, is to be able to, and maybe exercising, letting go of things, writing them down, you know, letting go of very hurtful situations in your life. It's like then you can rebirth. You can let go of it, and then there's no fear.
Well, I'm glad you brought this up too, because, you know, you can have a death in your life in so many ways. It doesn't just have to be somebody that you love has passed. It can be the death of a relationship. It can be the death of a job. It can be an illness that you have that feels like you've lost a part of yourself. So there's many ways that death, you know, takes form in our life. And what you were saying, you know, I don't think we really do in this culture, is to give us the opportunity to, you know, to process that, to grieve.
Grieve, that's huge.
And I just have to say, you know, a great example of this, and this would be more of the, you know, the collective consciousness at work, but, you know, after 9/11, I swear within like 2 days, America, you know, we move on, you know, we heal. And it's like, in 2 days? I don't think so. You know, we need to take as long as it takes. And we certainly weren't given that opportunity. It was like, go out and shop, You know, the economy is, you know, we can't let those terrorists, you know, hit our economy. And it was like, what the heck? Am I the only one that think, you know, that this is insane?
Yeah. Well, you know, that's also masking the pain, when I think. And you know, I don't want to be gender specific really, but you know, well, you know, both genders do that because they don't want to feel the pain. And it comes back to, you know, once you feel that pain of loss, like you were saying, the grieving process needs to happen so you can let go, and then you can let go.
Well, okay, so 9/11 was like a collective consciousness, you know, way of this manifesting, you know, reflecting of how we are as human beings and how we are dealing with the world. On a more personal level, my sister, my oldest sister, was 8 months pregnant, and she lost her child. And she had to carry the baby to full term, knowing that it was dead. And I just, you know, next to my father's death when I was 13 years old, this was the most devastating experience that I've ever witnessed and experienced, and it was just move on. You know, there was never any kind of ceremony for that baby. It was just like time to move on, you know, and we never acknowledged it. We never had a chance to grieve. My sister never had any kind of a process. Her and her husband, the marriage, you know, failed eventually. But I think that experience played a huge part in that. Not communicating about it, not having anybody to facilitate this grief process. And I saw a documentary that was done in Australia, and they actually, you know, have the parents hold the baby, you know, and have some time to grieve,
mourning.
and you know, and they do have a ceremony, and
it's
I
a
think
ritual.
it's so important.
Yeah, and I know that, like, I understand that, like, the Hebrews, you know, you just grieve for a whole year. I mean, they say too, and my understanding, because I wasn't dogmatic with my religion, but I understand that it, you know, they say it takes a year of grieving when you lose a partner. Some people never get over it, and they end up dying. I mean, that's the closeness that people get. But, you know, generally speaking, it's, you know, you're supposed to, like, take a year. But then, you know, it depends what it is, you know, too. I mean, I'm sure there's variables in there, how deep emotionally it goes, you know, and how do you monitor that, you know, the length of time, you know, the depth of the love, you know, whatever. I mean, my dad died when I was 24, and I still choke up when I really think about it. I miss him. We were so close. And, you know, the grieving has gone on for years, but I try not to think about it too much. I mean, I don't actually have to try not to think about it, but it's like there's certain things that happen, and it triggers that memory of my dad. And, you know, that love was so deep. I don't know if you ever really get over it emotionally. You know, I don't know.
That's a huge loss. And I mean, that was really my first loss, was the loss of my father. Yeah. And it took me a lifetime, really, to process that loss, you know, because in those days, this was 1969, I was 13, my siblings were like 16, 17, and 18. And my mother, you know, I think my mother was a 42-year-old widow with 4 teenagers. And I just remember not really having much experience with death, if any. And it was my first experience with death that was such a huge, death in my life. The whole sense of abandonment and confusion and anger and not knowing how to
process,
because we weren't taught how to do this, and in those days, I mean, as far as therapy, it would have been so helpful for grief therapy, and
absolutely.
But people just didn't do that in those days, and coming from New England, it was, the Kennedys don't cry, so you just kept a stiff upper lip and
stuffed it in.
Yeah, and looking back, I can see my brother got into drugs, and we were all eventually smoking pot, and there was alcohol issues, and it's just anesthetizing,
right?
And not understanding that that's what you're doing. So that's why I feel so grateful to have an opportunity to, maybe somebody out there can benefit from talk about it,
right. Yeah. Well, it's really not difficult when, like, if you can put in perspective, I mean, this has worked for me, is that, release and let go, but it's also allowing yourself to feel. When you start feeling that sadness, even a loss in a relationship, it's important to allow yourself to feel it, to really feel it. You're not going to die, if you let yourself. I think some people are so fearful of letting themselves feel it because it's like a black hole, and it's really not, because when you let yourself feel it, you can immerse yourself in it, and then it'll go. At least the worst of it will go away, when you allow yourself to feel it. So, that grieving process, I mean, I know that there isn't, I know that it's out there to grieving support, and there's, it's out there, but out there in the general media, it doesn't, as you were talking about 9/11. I remember, I wanted to say this earlier, I remember at 9/11, I remember after maybe a week or two, the whole country was affected by that. And people on the freeways were slowing down. I was like in awe, because everybody was affected by it. And that, it was a terrible thing to happen, but it did affect all of us collectively. And if we could hold that collectively and just, embrace, I get goosebumps even talking about this. Embrace that, to keep that love, to embrace all of us as one.
Well, my feeling is we had a tremendous opportunity, in that time period, because it was almost as if we had shifted our beliefs, our way of living. It was becoming more obvious that, what's this all about? Why are we doing this? Why is there war? Why are we fighting each other? The greed, everything was like wrapped up, and it was really palatable. I believe what you say. It was very, very palatable to everyone. And then we just let it go. We didn't hold on to it. We didn't use it as a momentum to move forward into this new way of being.
However, I'll never forget Giuliani, was the mayor at the time, and I remember all those people working together, and the closeness that they went through, and created that closeness in that whole time in New York. It's awesome, and it unfortunately it takes a catastrophe, a crisis, to bring us together. And
it seems that way. It really
it does.
And I think, again, going from the macrocosm to the microcosm, in my life, it took cancer
Yeah,
for
that's
me
right.
to wake up. You know, it's like we wake up and then we fall asleep, and then we wake up and then we fall asleep. And so then things get worse and worse, or more and more dramatic, you know, because I can look back and see many wake-up calls that I had. And it stirred me, and it may have, you know, kind of woke me up for a day, a year, but I fell back asleep again. So the cancer was like, thank God, you know, the wake-up call that I'm still awake, Cheryl. I'm still here, you know, I'm still like mindful and aware. But it's almost, I don't know, why does it take something hurtful or...
It shouldn't, you know. I mean, it doesn't have to be that way. If you're open, I mean, for me, this, of course, is my own personal experience. I'm open to my spiritual being. And I have, you know, studied Deepak Chopra for years. And you know, there's one thing that I really got from him after years is just being aware of the synchronicities that happen. Every day I have synchronicities because I'm becoming more awake all the time. I mean, I should be writing all of them down, but there's so many, especially now, what's been going on in my life. I've been having challenges coming right and left. And it's like, okay. And I have to go through a death process to deal with these situations because it's attacking me really at a very vulnerable place. But I can't, I almost know that because I've grown, that I don't have to let it attack me at my core, at my soul level. So when you're aware, and it's even hard to put into words, but when you stay awake and aware of the synchronicities that happen, it's easier for you to let go. I mean, something emotionally. I mean, I shed tears because I learned a long time ago, and this is through my church, is that crying and grieving is really healthy for your body, for your heart, for your mind, because what it's doing is it's cleansing your soul. And we don't have support out there with the media, generally speaking, to listen to your soul. It's like my soul purpose, your soul purpose, and passion. You know, we don't have that support around that. But when you focus in on that, it's like, wow. I mean, every day there's synchronicities that happen for, you know, and it's awesome. I mean, I've been experiencing that for solidly every day now for a couple weeks because of what I've been going through. And I'm just so grateful because it makes it easier to let go of things. I don't know if I'm really making sense in all this, but I guess I haven't communicated it articulatively. But it's again, death and rebirth. Death and rebirth. You know, when you go through a death, emotionally, I'm talking about emotionally, I'm not talking about, you know, if you lose your loved one. I'm talking about emotionally. Then it's like you move to a different level when you let go emotionally.
Well, if you don't let go, if you don't accept, and we're talking, like you mentioned earlier, you know, people are either in denial or, you know, those are like those stages of death. I remember reading that book by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and,
right.
You know, denial was definitely one of them. Yeah. But it's something that we need to accept that it's part of
life.
Yeah.
It is. It's like birth. It's just the other side of birth and death.
I think, you know, in my experience, it was more acceptable or easier to accept when it was older people were dying.
Sure.
You know,
yeah.
Grandmother, you know, an old relative or something that was to be expected. But when I was like late 40s, I started losing friends. And that just rocked my world. And I found when I was like 50-ish, I was thinking about death a lot. And it concerned me, you know. And then I just realized, you know, it's like we're over the hill. Literally, we're on the other, you know, and be that as, you know, people could say, oh, you're just middle-aged. Well, I don't know how many people you know that are like, you know, going to live to be 108 or whatever.
Well,
you know?
it's very possible
well,
today.
That's true, but you get over, you know, you get, like, you're perceived as an older person, you know, you're not perceived as young anymore. You're perceived as, and I just found like myself thinking about it more and more, and I'm single. I don't have a significant
Family.
other or
Right.
a child.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, I'm not going to put my sister or anybody else in the position where if I, you know, leave the planet tomorrow, they're going to be stuck with, you know, cleaning up after me, you know. And I just felt like it's my responsibility to make those arrangements myself. I think people are doing it more and more. But when I started, you know, the process of making my own funeral arrangements and, you know, paying, you know, prepaying, and everything's taken care of. I've even written my own obituary. And people, you know, looked at me like I was effing crazy.
Yeah. Well.
And now I think it's starting to catch on. I really do. People would rather write their own obituary than have some, you know, newspaper person or somebody that doesn't even know them, you know. I think it's great to, you know, take responsibility, take control.
I haven't gotten there yet because I feel like I'm going to be here for a long time. I have a lot of work to do, you know.
Well, I do too. I mean, I feel that way too, but, you know,
well,
who
no,
knows?
it's smart. It's smart.
And frankly, I mean, I say this, right, but, you know, whenever the time comes, I like to think of it as you've fulfilled your mission. You know, you've achieved your purpose. You've done what you were sent here to do, or what you chose to do, and it's kind of like a validation. Now you can go back home. You know, now you can be back with spirit, or your parents, your ancestors,
right.
And those friends that, you know, left me way too early, as far as I felt, but they fulfilled their mission. You know.
Yeah, well, I definitely feel that way towards Robin Williams. You know, I mean, with his death last year, that I know affected a lot of people because he brought so much joy into so many millions of people's lives. But I thought through that, and I thought, you know what? He fulfilled his mission, what he needed to do to on this planet. You know, I mean, he was over the top, you know, with all the movies and his funny and improv and his brilliance. But he was done.
And I think every time something like that happens, you know, especially if it's somebody that we all know, it resonates with everybody. You know, I would hope that in his case it would resonate with the whole aspect of, you know, depression, you know, mental illness.
Right.
I think that's another one of those topics that is still somewhat
taboo, but it's better. It's better.
Yeah.
And you know, on that, I think it's also a message to appreciate life now. You know, when this, I mean, I've lost my best friend, and she was 3 years older than me, but it was 7 years ago that she passed away, and it was a horrible death. It was horrible. She didn't deserve it, I didn't think. But that, you know, it's like, appreciate life. That's one of the messages of death, is appreciate what you have now and appreciate others. I think that's really important.
Well, you know, it's like we live in this world of duality. You know, it's white or black, it's good or bad, it's rich or poor, blah, blah, blah. I think, you know, it's a matter of finding the, the balance and not judging either one. It is what it is, and accept it as part of the human experience.
Yeah. And now, how do you let go of fear around death? Well, that's a big question. Unless you've had people around you dying. I mean, I've lost all my parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts. My aunt was only 63 when she died. My mother was only 73. And I was like not even a teenager when my grandmother passed away. And I didn't find out how she died until I was overhearing a conversation, which wasn't pleasant. But it's like, and that kind of scared me. But it is part of life, It's like if you can put it in perspective, like they're going to a better place. I mean, to let go of this body is freeing, I would think, And maybe it's easy for me to say that because I had to fight for my life coming onto this planet. I don't know, but
I think it would be much healthier and the fear would dissipate if we didn't keep it this forbidden subject or this, uncomfortable topic or there's, oh, that's depressing, or, oh, that's morbid, and it's constantly like pushing it aside, and I feel very pleased that one of my sisters has also begun the process of putting her ducks in a row and getting everything in order for her own, because she doesn't want her son to have to deal with that when he's grieving about losing her, dealing with the, I mean, my oldest sister had to do that with my mother when my father died and go pick out the casket. I mean, it was just, you're in that grief-stricken place and it's surreal, and you're making these decisions that you really, aren't prepared to make, and, better to do it when you're lucid and healthy and you know what you want and you take the burden off of somebody else.
Well, I don't think we're taught to think about that. In
Not
reality,
at all.
In reality, we're not I know I wasn't, except that I have been exposed to a lot of death, and to think about how you want your own, that's like it's foreign to a lot of people, I'm sure, because we're not taught that.
Well, it wasn't that many years after my father died, my brother ended up going to the New England School of Mortuary Science and became an undertaker.
Oh, wow.
And when...
That's taking it really seriously.
Yeah. But, it was a very good experience for me. I actually went to visit him at the funeral home, and he took me on a tour. And, I had in my mind, things that you see in the movies, and it's, creepy, and cobwebs, and ghosts, and, I mean, who knows? Well, you know what?
Yeah.
We had no other thing to base it on.
Point of reference.
Seriously.
Yeah.
So he took me, and it was very clinical, very much like a hospital room.
Were you able to see a corpse?
Well, I had actually, that was like my first encounter with death. I was a little girl. My parents were on vacation, and we were staying with my mom's aunt and her husband. So it was my great aunt and uncle. And Uncle Ace owned a funeral home. And so we were living in the living quarters of this funeral home. And I crept down into the, the main floor.
Curiosity kills the cat, but satisfaction brings him back.
Well, I ended up going into some, room, and there was a casket, and the woman was laid out, and I had never, seen anything like that before. So it was kind of creepy. I don't think I ever even mentioned to them that I had done that. I think I was kind of scared, and
yeah, well, you probably felt like you shouldn't be in there by yourself,
But, you cut 2 years later, I really had no experience with the ceremony of the wake, and then there's the funeral service, and we were at the funeral home, and it was, again, my great uncle's funeral home, and my mother said she was going to take us, down the corridor so that we could all say goodbye to my dad. And we walked down this corridor, and boom, like there he is, and I wasn't prepared for it.
Yeah.
And it was really kind of gruesome. He just looked waxy.
Yeah.
And his hair, like, he kind of had a little bit of a comb over, but they really, like, he would have loved how they did his hair. It never looked so good. But there was a fly crawling all over his face.
Not a good image.
And it just, why that had to be, like, the way, my last remembrance of my father just seemed so, I don't know, strange, so weird, so negative.
Well, I know that a lot, religions and so forth, believe in the old, like the South, and they believe in having open caskets. I have a hard time with that. I want to remember them the way they were. I know my grandfather had an open casket, and so did my grandmother. I couldn't go look at them.
Well, now that I think about it, truly, it really validated that was not him.
Yeah.
It was simply a shell.
Yeah.
And I wonder, like, I've heard two things. One, and I think you mentioned it in an earlier conversation we had, that when we make our transition, they can't account for like 4 ounces.
Right.
And
the spirit.
I don't know whether like the body houses the spirit or the spirit houses the body. I guess either way.
Well, but they have proven that it does, that they can't explain, the scientists can't explain, all of a sudden there's 4 ounces that are gone when they're studying the whole process of death. So I understand that it's a spirit. I mean, that's what I have read, and so why not? Because we need to be more spiritual beings anyway. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. That's what I like to say, because it takes the edge off of the negative and the black and white, because not everything is black and white.
Yeah.
Hello.
It's mostly shades of
yes,
gray.
Yes. So, with the death, it's like, when you have a wake, when you go to a wake, when you have, I've done some service, some memorials for people after death, and it's like you're there to celebrate. You're there to celebrate their life and not focus on that death. And that, grieving is separate. That's separate from, the celebration of life. But it's so important to celebrate your life after you're gone. Remember all the good stuff.
Even better, celebrate it while you're still alive.
Well, of course, and appreciate it. So, on the other hand, death, when you think about it, can also make you appreciate what the people that you do have in your lives, because maybe you don't want to lose them so soon, or you may go or whatever, but it's like, it's a way to wake up to appreciation.
I have a good feeling since I've learned about these death cafes that are happening.
Yeah.
And
I
just missed the one that was in Fairfax. And you can go online. I think it's deathcafe.com, and you can find out if there's one happening in your area. But I heard like 80 people showed up for that, and it's just a way to be with other people and talk about death. Have you got questions? Have you got concerns? Have you got,
It's a wonderful way to work through your fear around it.
Absolutely.
Because some people are stagnated, are stunned by that word, and it's a good way to open up, because the more you can talk about it, the easier it'll be to be able to deal with it.
I mean, my other sister, her husband just had open heart surgery, and whenever I would talk about death or my, getting my preparations all together, she was very like skittish about that. And now that her husband had to go through the experience, it's like, this was almost like a blessing. It was nature's way of saying, you got to get yourself like organized. Is there a will? Is there, oh no, I don't want to talk about, that's mostly what people do. But you can save yourself a lot of heartache and trouble just by
and
treating it like another, writing a check or anything else that you do to manage your life.
Well, but there's emotion to it, and it takes longer and harder to get to that point. And don't you think, too, because you did go through your cancer experience, that it's easier for you to look at death because you had to look at that within your own self?
Well, I think that, I don't think I am unique in that when I heard the words, you have cancer, I didn't immediately go to the end game.
Yeah.
It's all over. I mean, fortunately, within 24 hours, that whole scenario, and I attribute it to the power of prayer, because it was like the first time in my life that I actually reached out and asked for help. And ask people, please send me your, healing vibes and positive thoughts and prayers. And within 24 hours, I was told, well, if you had to have cancer, this is the cancer you want because it's highly treatable and, good success rate. So it was like, thank you. Yeah. But for that 24 hours, I was already like, and I was in an utter place of fear.
Fear. Oh yeah. I'm sure. I can only imagine.
But,
but you survived it, and you can help others by talking about it. I think I'm glad you brought up the death cafes, because I think that's important. It seems morbid, it seems, but, it's there to help. It's there to release that fear, I mean, we're stuck in fear in so many levels, and it's so important to let go of fear on all, financially, for death, we're talking about death, but relationships, it's so important so you can live freely.
Well, in my experience, it's been, I think, to turn away from it, to block it, to not,
deny it.
That it's just going to come back and bite you at a later time with some other issue, So I finally got to a place of, I think actually it was moving out here and being of a certain age and not having a job and only a limited amount of savings, and it was like, what the hell have I done? In the economy being the way it was, and I really understood that in order this was an opportunity, and in order for that fear not to come again at my door, I had to. There you are. Come on in. Let's have a sesh. Let's talk. It's like face the fear.
Yeah.
Embrace the fear.
Yeah,
that it goes against every fiber of your being. But that's, at least in my experience.
That's what it takes. It's true. Deal with it right in front of you. It's true.
Yep. No anesthetizing it, no denying it, no, there's so many ways of distracting yourself from it, and it was finally like until I can just look fear in the eye and say, okay, let's go.
I'm going to get you. You're not going to get me. I'm going to get you.
You're part of life.
Yeah,
you're part of
absolutely.
The experience. And
it's part of the human condition. It is, but we have the choice. Thank God for our awareness and our minds, but our awareness that you have the choice whether you want to stay in that fear or not. Well, we have to step through it. It isn't something, I believe that it isn't something that you just deny that you don't have the fear. You have to work through it.
I heard a great quote. I think it's from the I Ching, or maybe it's from the runes, and it says, you know, when you're in deep water, learn to dive. You know, you've got to immerse yourself, and then you will come out the other side.
Yeah. Absolutely. Amen. So, well, we've definitely covered this pretty well. Is there anything else that you can think of that you want to share with our viewers?
I just feel like, you know, we pretend, you know, saying I'm fine when you're suffering, or don't, you know, my mother used to, she would say, smile and the world smiles with you, weep and you weep alone, you know. I mean, it's like,
I don't like that.
Share your experience. I have girlfriends that I've known since kindergarten. It's only been in the last maybe 5 years that we've been open about our feelings with each other, willing to admit we're not perfect, we make mistakes, we're fearful of certain things, you know, we're human.
Absolutely.
And it was like such a huge relief for everybody to go, oh wow, Jill feels like that too, or, you know, like, no, we're not perfect. We're human, and embrace your humanity and embrace everything that goes with it, including the foibles and the frailties.
Yeah, and also putting in perspective the ego that gets in our way, because a lot of that is ego, and it's not always healthy, you know, for our best, you know, until you're aware of it. So I'm always getting in check with that ego.
I think it would be so great if, and I think there are more and more like classes that are being taught to children in emotional literacy and that kind of thing. But, you know, no, we're plunked, you know, from the womb, the warmth and the dark and the comfort into this, it's just lights and noise, and we're not told this is how Earth works.
Yeah, welcome to Earth.
Yeah, and you know, you're going to have feelings, and you're not going to know what to do with them. Yeah. You know, this is how you might want to think about. You know, it's you know, from the humane thing to do.
I know. Well, but from generation to generation to generation, you know. I mean, I think we are getting healthier on some level, and I think it's in some areas, you know, meaning where you are geographically. I think it also makes a difference, you know, the awareness, the energy, spiritual energy that's in a place, you know, I think also nurtures more of expressing yourself like we have here in Marin. You know, it's more progressive that way, to be elevating humanity, you know, our humanness. And so I'm very grateful because I can do this show and share and help people, you know. Our time is...
What?
It's over.
Get out.
It's over.
What? I don't believe it.
Yeah, it's over. Look, we're going over. But that's okay.
Not even a camera on.
Jill, thank you so much for being here and sharing this extremely important information that it'll be out there.
My pleasure.
In the web, it'll be on TV, it'll, you know, so
I'm pleased and proud to have been a part of this dialogue.
Yes.